So this week is all about crafting the position description, finalizing that, sourcing, and outreach.
We have 5 objectives for today. We're going to go back to that job posting exercise and some of those KSAs and understand key anchors of the positions. And so this is, we'll do this right off the hop as sort of a way to close the loop after the weekly challenge from last week's discussion. And then we're going to be talking about sourcing and sort of scoping for the search. So we've got 3 buckets for collecting and conveying information about the role, just different ways of organizing the different elements. And then this idea of crafting an information package and a media kit that will allow you to provide materials for others to help you share, for candidates to be able to access more information about the posting if they're interested, or the organization. And then this is like unpacking your who cubed. This is a sort of a framework that Tim and I are kind of constantly evolving. So it's really interesting for us to be able to present this to you, but thinking about, when you address sourcing, all of the different perspectives to be looking at, and then what those implications might be for what gets posted, where it gets shared, how it's presented. And then finally, we're going to touch a little bit on this idea of network mapping, so that you can think about that quote I think Tim shared last week, which was, it's the sort of second ring, that second circle out from the immediate sort of ring you would think about for the role that usually some really quality candidates come from. So really looking at the network and mapping that will help us to understand, where we might need some support, or where we might be able to lean on others to support the sharing. So the 3 buckets, we've talked a lot about sort of the organization, selling the organization, being transparent, some of those pieces that are really important for candidates to know. And it feels like a lot, right? You've all seen job postings that are, scrolling pages and pages and pages. And so, this slide is sort of an invitation to think about where the information that you're capturing is best sort of suited to be read and, taken for all that it is. And so we sort of think about this in 3 buckets of information sharing. The first one being that job description. So the job description is probably, the one thing that informs the posting quite significantly, but it's different because it has sort of that internal sort of what's the word I'm looking for? It's in relation to other roles and other aspects of the organization and the work that goes on, but it's not a marketing lens. You're not using that to sell the organization or the opportunity. And so there are pieces in there, that might be budget or, different reporting relationships or things like that are really important for the candidate to know, but may not have a place in the posting unless, that's a signal of, how free the person coming into this role can be and how much autonomy they might have. You might choose to say, that fits in position discovery because it's useful information for somebody, but it might not be the draw that's coming in. So we think about, the more formal description of the job. It's usually kind of a template across the organization in a really similar format. It's probably more formal language. It's probably, really centered on the organizational structure or the organizational kind of design perspective. The posting has that external focus. It's the marketing sort of lens using to promote the opportunity. And then position discovery, we're going to talk a little bit more about this as we go through, but this is like everything else. How do we tell the different stories or talk about, animate some of the more exciting or more interesting aspects of the role? We could use video. There might be images, there might be bios of search committee, there might be salaried information or policies around pay transparency or budget information. And so this could include an information package. It could be conversations that are shared from team members. It could be, video format and all that stuff. So your candidates aren't not receiving all of this information, but they're not receiving it sort of and having to make sense of it or find it, or worse yet, go digging around your website or others to try to find that information that might help them prepare to bring themselves to the interviews.
Yeah, I love to think about how you drip information over the process, and that idea of like the job posting as an ad to connect with the people who are interested in learning more, and then how you add these bits and pieces in throughout the process rather than dropping it all in a 7-page, 8-page posting. Because going back to that research, I think we mentioned last week, where um, white guys will apply for a job if they're 60% qualified, but everyone else sort of goes closer to 100%. And so how do we just highlight what's key up front? How can people learn information so that otherwise amazing candidates aren't already opting out before they even decide if they want to apply? I guess they are deciding before they even apply.
It's really interesting when we were building the posting for Opera Philadelphia, and we had seen generators post. We actually engaged them in a little, conversation and said, can we, you did an amazing job here. Can, do you mind if we borrow from that and do that? And the openness, for the reasons of, because you've done such a good, pre-work here. And so I love that idea of sort of sharing best practice and seeing what's out there and using the examples to inform or inspire the way that you're thinking about it as well. Because there are people that are doing this really, really, really well.
I want to go to Derek's comment, because I think I might have sort of framed it in a certain way. The job package that accompanies the posting is where you should be able to get all of the information, salary, benefits, who you report to, who's on the team. But the job posting or that ad isn't the place to include all of that. And I think this is one of those things where it's like most organizations post their job description as the job ad. So like all this information should be discoverable. But I think from an organizational standpoint is how do you modulate, I guess, if you will, like what's required for you to post up front, or what people need in order to make a decision about it. And so, yeah, I would say, as you'll see in those two examples we posted, there's a lot of information. There's like pages of information if you're interested in learning more about it, but it's not tied to that initial, might this be you who's interested in the role type of post. So hopefully that clarified it. Thanks for the prompt online.
That position discovery sort of information package and things like that might be the place where you expand on the number that you're providing in the posting. So that could be, if you have a policy around pay equity, or if you have the benefits that you can share. So you're giving people sort of the snapshot that they need in the posting, but the way that we're sort of talking about it is if you can see it all on one page and you can sort of click in, here's the information package if you want to know more. Here's links to the videos. Here's all of these things so that it's all there, but the things that draw you to that page or that, are those kind of key messages about the role. I think it's also, that the time involved in sort of reading about and researching positions. And I think that was one of the reasons why we had this conversation in the first place, because we said, how does what we put out, how do we get enough interest by what we put out? And how do we ask people as they move through the process that we can make it as efficient as possible for them? So if you don't have to spend the time researching or trying to understand, but we've got all of that on the page so that if you're interested, you can read more. And then if you were going into a screening call, you could brush up and know where to find everything. Or if you were preparing for an interview, you'd have access to all of that. And it would always be in the same place.